800,000 people. One city. The largest urban settlement on Earth in the year 1200. Bigger than Paris. Bigger than London. Bigger than Constantinople and Baghdad combined. Then, it vanished. Not in a war, not in a plague, not in a single recorded catastrophe that any chronicler bothered to write down. The Khmer Empire, the god kings who ruled Southeast Asia for 600 years, simply walked away from the greatest city humanity had ever built. They left temples taller than cathedrals. They left reservoirs the size of modern cities. They left a stone face carved into every mountain. And the jungle ate all of it in less than a century. That means an entire civilization, every priest, every soldier, every farmer, every god king, abandoned the capital that defined them. 800,000 people scattered into silence. No mass grave. No final battle remembered. Just stone faces staring at trees that grew through their own throne rooms. The survivors did not write the story. The winners did not write the story. Nobody wrote the story. This is the only major empire in human history that disappeared without leaving its own account of how it ended. And here is what makes it impossible. The Khmer were not weak. They controlled an empire larger than the Byzantine. They built Angkor Wat, still today the largest religious structure ever constructed by human hands. Their engineers moved more stone than the pyramids of Giza. Their kings commanded armies of 200,000 men. Empires that powerful do not simply evaporate, they are killed. Every modern military academy studies how civilizations collapse. The Pentagon ran a classified study on Angkor in the last 20 years, not for archaeology, for strategy. Because the way the Khmer Empire died is the exact pattern modern intelligence services watch for in the superpowers of today. The warning signs are identical. The blind spots are identical. The arrogance is identical. So how does the most advanced civilization in Asia, wealthier than medieval Europe, more populous than any Western capital, defended by the most sophisticated water system on Earth, die so completely that we forgot its name for 400 years? What was the single decision that started the collapse? And why did the god kings, with all their armies and all their gods, not see it coming until the river ran dry? This is Dust of Dynasties. And by the end of this, you will never look at Angkor Wat the same way again. To understand how Angkor died, you have to understand what Angkor was. This was not a city in any sense a modern person would recognize. Angkor was a machine, a vast, living, breathing machine built from water and stone and God belief. The Khmer Empire rose around 802 AD. A king named Jayavarman II climbed a sacred mountain. He performed a ritual that declared him a god on earth, not a king who served the gods, a god himself walking among men. That single ceremony created the foundation of everything that followed. For the next 400 years, every Khmer ruler was a divine being. The empire was not held together by armies alone, it was held together by faith. Every farmer in every rice paddy believed the king's body was literally the body of a god, and that God's body was the reason the rains came. The army was massive, 200,000 soldiers at peak, war elephants by the hundreds, crossbowmen mounted on elephant towers, firing bolts that could pierce 3 men at once. But the real weapon of the Khmer Empire was not steel, it was water. The engineers built a network of reservoirs called barrages. The largest was nearly 5 miles long, 2 miles wide, holding 70 million cubic meters of water. By comparison, that is more water than most modern reservoirs supplying entire American cities today. This water system irrigated 3 rice harvests per year. 3, most ancient civilizations managed one. The Khmer fed 800,000 people in their capital alone and still had surplus rice to trade across half of Asia. The wealth was unimaginable. Chinese diplomats who visited Angkor in the 1290s wrote that the royal palace was covered in gold. The king's bed was inlaid with pearls. The royal guard wore armor plated with silver. The ambassador described it as a place that made the great cities of China look small, and every brick of it depended on water arriving exactly when the engineers expected it. Nobody in Angkor understood how fragile that assumption was. The god kings believed the rain came because they were gods. The priests believed the rain came because of ritual. The engineers believed the rain came because they had always built the canals to receive it. None of them were preparing for the day the rain simply stopped coming. That day was coming. The clouds were already changing over the Himalayas. The monsoon patterns that had fed Angkor for 4 centuries were beginning to shift, and the king who would face the first warnings had no framework to understand what he was seeing. His scribes recorded floods, then droughts, then floods again, out of sequence, out of pattern. The empire was perfect. The empire was eternal. The empire was a god's body, and the god's body was beginning to starve. Suryavarman II came to power in 1113. He was 23 years old. He had murdered his great-uncle in a palace coup that left blood on the throne room floor. He needed legitimacy. He needed proof of divinity. He needed to build something so massive that no one would ever question his right to rule. So he built Angkor Wat. Watch this from above. 5 square kilometers of carved stone. A moat wider than a 6-lane highway. 5 towers rising in the shape of Mount Meru itself, the cosmic mountain at the center of the universe. It took 37 years to build, 300,000 workers, 6,000 elephants hauling stone from quarries 50 kilometers away, every block fitted with a precision that modern engineers still cannot fully explain. You are standing at the western gate. The sun is rising directly behind the central tower. The reflection in the moat doubles the image of the universe. Priests are chanting. Smoke is rising. The king walks the causeway alone. In that moment, he is not a man. He is the cosmos itself, given human form. This is what Angkor was at its peak, a perfect mirror of heaven, built by mortal hands. But Suryavarman was not finished. He needed war. Gods do not simply build. Gods conquer. He launched the largest military campaign in Khmer history. He invaded Vietnam. He invaded the Cham Kingdom on the eastern coast. He pushed his armies into modern-day Thailand and Laos. He fought the Ivit in jungle wars that killed tens of thousands. He won most of the battles. He could not hold most of the territory. And he did not understand that every campaign was draining the empire's manpower from the rice fields. The water system needed constant maintenance. 60,000 men just to keep the canals clean. Suryavarman pulled those men into the army. The first cracks appeared while he was still alive. Reservoirs began silting up. Channels began to choke. The rice harvests dropped from 3 to 2 per year in some districts. The priests recorded the change as a religious failure. They demanded more temples, more sacrifices, more gold poured into ritual. The engineers said nothing. The engineers had never had political power in Angkor. The king was a god. The god did not need to be told how to make rain. Suryavarman died around 1150. His tomb is the central chamber of Angkor Wat. His body was placed facing west, the direction of death, staring forever at the cosmic mountain he built to outlast time. He believed he had created something eternal. He had created the most expensive trap in human history. Then came the Cham invasion. In 1177, While the new Khmer king was distracted by court intrigue, a Cham fleet sailed up the Mekong River. They reached the Tonle Sap Lake. They marched on Angkor itself. The capital had no defensive walls worth the name. The god kings had never believed they could be attacked at home. The Khmer god lived here. The god could not be threatened by mortal armies. The Cham burned the city. They killed the king. They sacked the temples. They raped and butchered for 4 days inside Angkor. The greatest empire in Southeast Asia had been humiliated in its own capital by a smaller, hungrier enemy. A new king rose from the catastrophe. Jayavarman VII, the most consequential and most destructive ruler in Khmer history. He drove the Cham out. He rebuilt the army. He launched 20 years of revenge wars that turned the Mekong red. And then, he made the single decision that doomed the empire. He changed the gods. For 4 centuries, the Khmer Empire had been Hindu. Vishnu, Shiva, the cosmic order written in Sanskrit on every temple wall. Suryavarman had built Angkor Wat as a Vishnu temple. Jayavarman VII converted the empire to Mahayana Buddhism. You have to understand what this meant. The entire identity of the empire, the divinity of the king, the legitimacy of the priesthood, the religious basis of the water system was rebuilt overnight. He commanded the construction of a new capital. Angkor Thom. Inside it, he built the Bayon, a temple covered in 200 giant stone faces. Many scholars believe those faces are his own. He built more in 30 years than every previous Khmer king combined. 1,200 temples, 102 hospitals, 121 rest houses on the imperial roads. The labor required was beyond anything human society had ever organized, and every block of stone, every road, every hospital, every face on the Bayon came at the same cost. Farmers pulled from the fields, soldiers pulled from the borders, engineers pulled from the water system. The reservoirs were silting up faster now. Some had become so clogged they no longer held water at all. The priests of the old Hindu order, who had maintained the religious calendar that regulated water releases, were exiled, killed, or stripped of authority. Their knowledge went with them. Nobody in Angkor knew anymore exactly how the system worked. They only knew it had always worked before. Jayavarman VII died around 1218. His son tried to reverse everything. The empire converted back to Hinduism. The Buddhist temples were defaced. The faces on the Bayon had their lips chiseled away by men who had served them as gods only a generation earlier. The civil-religious war lasted decades. The empire never recovered the unity of belief that had made the god-king system function. And the climate was already changing. Tree ring data recovered from the region in the last 20 years shows what no medieval chronicler could see. Between 1340 and 1380, Southeast Asia experienced the worst series of droughts in 500 years. Decade-long failures of the monsoon. Then, sudden megafloods that ripped apart what was left of the canal system. The Khmer water machine was already weakened by neglect and war. It could not survive a climate that had stopped behaving the way the engineers expected. The harvests collapsed. The rice surplus that fed the capital vanished. For the first time in 400 years, Angkor was hungry. Picture the city now. 800,000 people, granaries empty, canals broken, priests blaming each other for the failure of the gods, soldiers unpaid, the borders crumbling against a rising new power to the west. That power was Ayutthaya, a Thai kingdom that had been a Khmer vassal for centuries. In 1431, the Ayutthayan army marched on Angkor. The siege lasted months. The defenders were already starving. The king had already lost the faith of his own people. When the walls fell, the slaughter was almost an afterthought. The real death of Angkor had happened in the rice fields 10 years earlier, when the water did not come and nobody knew how to fix it. The survivors did not rebuild. They moved south. They founded a new capital near modern Phnom Penh on a river that did not require an ancient machine to feed. And then came the morning that no chronicle records, but every archaeologist agrees happened. Somewhere around 1450, the last farmers on the edge of Angkor packed their belongings and walked away. The temples were still standing. The face of Jayavarman still stared from every tower of the Bayon. The reflection of Angkor Wat still doubled itself in the moat at sunrise. But there was nobody left to see it. The jungle moved in within a generation. Banyan roots cracked the sandstone. Strangler figs wrapped themselves around the heads of the god kings. Tigers walked through the throne rooms. For 400 years, Europe forgot Angkor existed. When a French naturalist named Henri Moho stumbled into the ruins in 1860, he could not believe a human civilization had built it. He wrote that it was grander than anything left by Greece or Rome. He wrote that it had been built by a vanished people whose name nobody remembered. He was looking at the largest religious building on earth, and he did not know who had built it. That is the real horror of Angkor. Not that it fell. Empires fall. The horror is that it was forgotten. 800,000 people. A god king on a golden throne. An army of 200,000. A water system that fed half a continent. All of it erased so completely that even the descendants of the survivors could not point to the ruins and name them. The lesson the Pentagon studied is this. The Khmer Empire did not die from a stronger enemy. It did not die from disease. It did not die from a single decisive defeat. It died because it had built its entire civilization on a single assumption, that the system that had always worked would continue to work, that the climate would not change, that the gods would not need to be questioned, that the experts who maintained the invisible infrastructure could be ignored or replaced without consequence. Every superpower in human history has died the same way. Rome did not fall to barbarians. Rome fell because the grain supply from Egypt became unreliable, and nobody could fix the political system fast enough to adapt. The Soviet Union did not fall to Western armies. It fell because the oil price collapsed, and the economic machine the regime depended on was a machine nobody fully understood anymore. The Khmer god kings believed they were eternal because the rain had always come. Right now, in capitals across the modern world, leaders are making the same assumption about supply chains, electrical grids, food systems, and water reserves that were designed 70 years ago and are maintained by aging infrastructure that fewer and fewer engineers truly understand. The Pentagon report did not mention any specific country. It did not need to. The pattern is the same in every era. A civilization builds a machine it does not understand. The machine works for so long that the civilization forgets it is a machine at all. They start to believe the prosperity is natural, eternal, divine. Then the inputs change, and nobody alive remembers how the machine was built. The god kings of Angkor walked through their throne rooms believing they were the cosmos itself. They had stopped being engineers. They had become symbols. And symbols cannot fix a canal. The faces on the Bayon are still smiling. Stone lips curved in a peace that outlived every man who carved them. They watched the empire die. They watched the jungle come. They watched 400 years of silence wrap itself around the most powerful civilization in Southeast Asia. And they are still smiling now. So tell me this, looking at the collapse of Angkor, Was the empire doomed the moment Jayavarman VII changed the gods and shattered the priesthood that maintained the water system? Or was the real death sentence written earlier, when Suryavarman drained the engineers into his armies to build a monument he believed would last forever? At what moment did the god kings stop being able to save themselves? Drop your answer in the comments. The best arguments always come from the people watching closely. If this changed how you see Angkor, subscribe. There is more coming. Next we go inside the empire that survived 3 Mongol invasions and still died from a single mistake nobody saw coming. The god kings built mountains of stone. The jungle ate them in 100 years.